I don't think it's nice you laughing. See, my mule don't like people laughing.
In the dusty annals of Western cinema history, few partnerships have left as indelible a mark as the collaboration between Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef. Their performances in Sergio Leone's iconic Dollars trilogy redefined the genre, creating a new template for the American Western that would influence filmmakers for generations to come. Now, decades after Van Cleef's passing in 1989, Clint Eastwood has finally opened up about their professional relationship, sharing memories that paint a complex picture of two titans of cinema, whose on-screen chemistry masked a much more complicated reality. The making of icons. The year was 1965. Clint Eastwood, fresh off his television success in Rawhide, had already made a splash in Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars. For the sequel, For a Few Dollars More, Leone was looking for someone who could match Eastwood's intensity on screen. He found that match in Lee Van Cleef, a veteran character actor whose distinctive features and penetrating gaze had already made him a recognizable face in Hollywood, often cast as villains in films like High Noon and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. When I first met Lee on the set of For a Few Dollars More, I knew we were creating something special, Eastwood recalls in a recent Rare interview. There was something about his presence that elevated every scene. Leone understood that immediately. In For a Few Dollars More, Van Cleef played Colonel Douglas Mortimer, a bounty hunter who reluctantly teams up with Eastwood's character to hunt down a ruthless outlaw. The film showcased a different side of Van Cleef, not the typical villain, but a complex, morally ambiguous character, with his own code of honor. Their partnership reached its zenith in 1966's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where Van Cleef portrayed the merciless hitman Angel Eyes, the bad, to Eastwood's Good, and Eli Wallach's Ugly. The film would become not just the crown jewel of Leone's trilogy, but one of the most influential westerns ever made. Behind the iconic performances, what many fans don't realize is that when Van Cleef joined the cast of For a Few Dollars More, he was in the midst of rebuilding his career and his life. Following a serious car accident in 1958 that shattered his kneecap, Van Cleef had struggled with chronic pain and a developing addiction to alcohol and painkillers. His career had stalled, and he was primarily taking small television roles to make ends meet. Lee was fighting his own battles when we worked together, Eastwood reveals. He rarely complained, but you could see it in his eyes sometimes, the pain he was dealing with. It actually added something to his performances, a layer of world weariness that you can't fake. The role of Colonel Mortimer in For a Few Dollars More represented a major comeback for Van Cleef. Leone had specifically sought him out, remembering his striking appearance from American westerns. What neither Leone nor Eastwood could have predicted was how Van Cleef's physical struggles would translate into his performance. There's a scene where Lee has to climb a set of stairs and look through a window with a spyglass, Eastwood recounts. It probably took 15 takes because he was in such pain from his knee injury, but when you watch the film, that discomfort translates into this incredible tension and focus. That's what made him special. He could transform his personal struggles into art. The truth about their relationship. For decades, rumors have swirled about a rivalry between the two Western icons. Fans have speculated about everything from professional jealousy to personal animosity, fueled by their contrasting personas on screen and limited public appearances together after the Leone films. There was never any rivalry, Eastwood states emphatically, addressing the persistent rumors head-on. That's the kind of thing people invent because it makes for a better story than the truth. The truth is, we were professionals who respected each other's work. However, Eastwood does acknowledge that their relationship was more complex than many might assume. We weren't close friends in the conventional sense, he admits. Lee was a private person, and so am I. We didn't spend time together off set, but there was a mutual respect that was almost unspoken. This professional distance, Eastwood suggests, actually contributed to the electric tension between their characters on screen. Sometimes the most powerful connections on camera come from a certain distance in real life, he observes. Neither of us was trying to be buddies. We were focused on creating something authentic. Perhaps most surprising is Eastwood's admission that he and Van Cleef had fundamentally different approaches to acting. Lee was meticulous about his preparation. He had this theatrical background and martial arts training that informed everything he did. Every movement was deliberate. I was more intuitive, more about feeling the moment. We were opposites in many ways, and Leone recognized that the contrast created something powerful. The physical toll of stardom. One of the more sobering aspects of Eastwood's reflections concerns the physical price Van Cleef paid for his career renaissance. Those Italian westerns were brutally difficult to film, Eastwood reveals. Long days in the Spanish desert, extreme temperatures, primitive conditions. For someone like Lee, who was already dealing with chronic pain, it was particularly tough. Van Cleef never let his physical limitations impact his professionalism, but Eastwood recalls moments where the strain was evident. There was one day filming The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when the temperature must have been over 100 degrees. We were all suffering, but Lee looked like he might collapse. Still, he insisted on finishing the scene. That was his way, never complaining, never making excuses. The physical demands of these roles, combined with Van Cleef's pre-existing health issues, would have lasting consequences. Though he continued working steadily after the Leone films, his health gradually deteriorated, culminating in heart disease that required a pacemaker in the 1980s. He ultimately died of a heart attack in 1989 at the age of 64. I sometimes wonder if those films took years off his life, Eastwood reflects. He gave everything to those performances, often at great physical cost. That's something I don't think many people understand about that era of filmmaking. There was no CGI, no shortcuts. What you see on screen, we actually did. And for someone already in pain like Lee, that took tremendous courage. The legacy they created together, despite never working together again after The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Eastwood and Van Cleef remained forever linked in cinema history. Their collaboration helped transform the Western genre, introducing moral ambiguity and stylistic innovations that would influence countless filmmakers. What we created with Leone was something neither of us fully appreciated at the time, Eastwood acknowledges. We were just trying to make the best films we could. Neither of us had any idea those movies would still be studied and celebrated all these decades later. For Van Cleef, the Leone Westerns represented both a career resurrection and a definitive body of work that would cement his place in film history. Though he would go on to star in dozens more Westerns and action films, particularly in Europe, it is his performances opposite Eastwood that remain most vivid in the public imagination. Lee never got the recognition he deserved in Hollywood, Eastwood states firmly. He was typecast as a villain because of his distinctive look, but he had tremendous range as an actor. Those Leone films finally gave him the showcase he deserved. But by then, he was already in his 40s and dealing with health problems. I've often thought about how different his career might have been if he'd had that breakthrough a decade earlier. Addressing the misconceptions. Perhaps most surprising in Eastwood's recent comments is his desire to correct what he sees as misconceptions about Van Cleef's character and capabilities. People assume, because he played these intense, often violent characters, that he was like that in real life, Eastwood notes. Nothing could be further from the truth. Lee was soft-spoken, intelligent, and had this dry sense of humor most people never got to see. Eastwood also points to Van Cleef's extensive martial arts training, something rarely mentioned in discussions of his career. He was disciplined in ways that went far beyond acting, Eastwood explains. He studied various martial arts styles and approached his performances with that same precision and focus. Nothing was accidental with Lee. Every gesture, every expression was considered and purposeful. This dedication extended to Van Cleef's marksmanship skills, developed during his service in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and maintained throughout his life. Lee didn't need to pretend to be good with firearms, Eastwood recalls. He was genuinely an excellent shot. There's an authenticity that comes from that kind of real-world experience. The final word on their legacy. As our conversation with Eastwood draws to a close, he offers a final reflection on his time with Van Cleef and the enduring impact of their work together. When I look back on those films now, I see two men who were at very different points in their lives and careers, brought together by a visionary director who saw something in both of us that perhaps we didn't fully see ourselves, Eastwood muses. Lee had been in Hollywood for years, typecast and underappreciated, fighting physical pain and career setbacks. I was still finding my way as an actor, still discovering what I could do. In the end, Eastwood suggests, it was precisely this contrast that created the magic on screen. There's a weight to Lee's performances, a gravity that comes from life experience and personal struggle. I was still developing that. Together, we created a balance that neither of us could have achieved alone. For fans of Western cinema, the Eastwood-Van Cleef dynamic represents a high watermark in the genre's history. Their performances in Leone's trilogy transcended the limitations of the traditional Western, introducing psychological complexity and moral ambiguity to what had often been a straightforward morality play. I'm grateful that Lee and I had the opportunity to work together when we did, Eastwood concludes. Those films changed both our lives and careers in ways we couldn't have imagined. Whatever personal challenges existed behind the scenes, his health problems, our different approaches to acting, what matters is what we put on film. That's the legacy, and I'm proud of it. As the interview ends, Eastwood offers one last thought about his former co-star. Lee Van Cleef was one of a kind. They truly don't make them like that anymore. I consider myself fortunate to have worked with him, and I think cinema is better because of the contributions he made. Fan reactions and industry response. Since Eastwood's revelations about his relationship with Van Cleef, reaction from fans and film historians has been swift and passionate. Many express surprise at learning about Van Cleef's physical struggles during the filming of these classic westerns, while others find new appreciation for performances they've admired for decades. I've watched For a Few Dollars More probably 20 times, and I never realized Van Cleef was in such pain during filming, comments film historian Robert Anderson. Knowing that now adds another dimension to his performance as Colonel Mortimer. You can see it in his eyes in certain scenes, not just acting, but real human experience translated into art. Online forums dedicated to Western films have been buzzing with discussion, with many fans expressing appreciation for Eastwood's candor about their professional relationship. It's refreshing to hear Eastwood dispel the rivalry myth, writes one longtime fan. Their chemistry on screen was electric precisely because they weren't trying to be friends or competitors. They were simply two consummate professionals focused on their craft. Industry veterans who worked with both men have also weighed in, largely confirming Eastwood's characterization of Van Cleef as a dedicated professional who rarely complained despite his physical challenges. Lee was old school, recalls veteran cinematographer John Harris, who worked with Van Cleef in the 1970s. He showed up prepared, knew his lines, hit his marks, and delivered exactly what the director needed. But he was indeed a private person who kept to himself between takes. A renewed appreciation. Perhaps the most significant outcome of Eastwood's comments has been a renewed appreciation for Van Cleef's body of work beyond the Leone westerns. Film programmers report increased interest in his other films, from early appearances in classics like High Noon, to later starring roles in European westerns like Day of Anger and Death Rides a Horse. Van Cleef had this remarkable career renaissance in Europe after the Leone films, notes film curator Maria Sanchez. He became a legitimate leading man in his 50s, which is unusual in itself. Yet much of this work remains underappreciated in America. Eastwood's comments have sparked interest in exploring Van Cleef's fuller filmography. Indeed, streaming platforms report a significant uptick in viewership of Van Cleef's films since Eastwood's interview, suggesting that new generations of film enthusiasts are discovering the actor's unique screen presence and contribution to cinema history. For many casual film fans, Van Cleef is frozen in amber as Angel Eyes from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, observes film critic David Chen. But there's so much more to his career. He played heroes as well as villains, complex characters who often operated in moral gray areas. Eastwood's comments have opened a door for people to discover the full range of Van Cleef's talent. The final take. As with many Hollywood relationships, the truth about Eastwood and Van Cleef's collaboration proves more nuanced than sensationalist headlines might suggest. There was no bitter rivalry, no dramatic falling out, just two professionals with different approaches to their craft, creating cinema history together under the direction of a visionary filmmaker. Eastwood's willingness to finally address these long-standing rumors offers a valuable correction to the historical record and provides fans with a deeper understanding of the human beings behind these iconic performances. More importantly, it serves as a reminder of Lee Van Cleef's significant contribution to cinema, a contribution sometimes overshadowed by Eastwood's subsequent superstardom. In the end, Eastwood concludes, "What matters is what's on film. And what's on film when Lee and I work together is something special that has stood the test of time. That's the real story, not some manufactured rivalry or behind-the-scenes drama. Two actors doing their best work, creating something that would last long after we're both gone." For fans of Western cinema, that legacy is indeed something to celebrate, not as the product of a heated rivalry, but as the result of a unique professional chemistry between two distinctive talents who, for a brief but magical time, combined their considerable skills to create something truly unforgettable. As one fan eloquently summed up, "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a masterpiece, but For a Few Dollars More is probably my personal favorite of the trilogy, my favorite Western, and one of my favorite films ever." I love the dynamic between Clint and Lee, and how personal the stakes are in the duel, even more so than the previous and next installment. Far from the sensationalist narrative of a bitter rivalry, the true story of Eastwood and Van Cleef reveals something more meaningful, a professional partnership that elevated both men's work and created a lasting contribution to cinema history. That's a legacy worth remembering and celebrating, beyond any clickbait headlines or manufactured drama.